We're finally making it into the 4th chapter, and we're going to look at the first 5 verses. Not that the rest of the Bible isn't, but this section of Philippians, at least for me, it's rich. This passage you could probably, come up with 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 12 different angles of a message on, but I'm going to take 1 through 5 this morning. All right, so it's Philippians 4, 1 through 5. Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm thus in the Lord, my beloved. I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. And I put a brief, just 5 points that's on the back of your bulletin. And they're pieces of a church fellowship and family that's healthy. And as Paul said to Timothy, the church is a pillar and the ground of truth. And sometimes, too, the church can get a little weird, right? We've seen a little bit of wonkiness here and there. We, as people, have a tendency to get into all sorts of disagreements over issues that really aren't pivotal. Personality disagreements, leadership quarrels. I can go down a list of some of these, but I know of a church that got into a huge argument over what picture of Jesus they were going to put in the foyer. Well, we don't really even know exactly what Jesus looked like, so why would you argue over that? Or there was a church that sent a petition through the entire congregation that they needed all their staff members clean shaven. Well, you think about that, that little request would not have done well at all back in the Old or the New Testament times. Then there was the church that wanted or brought up the big question of, at our potlucks, shouldn't we make sure that we don't have deviled eggs? Deviled eggs. As though the eggs were going to be demon-possessed. We find things to argue over that really have little to no real impact. I used to have to go to a small town in South Carolina that used to do some planing work for us. And as I was driving down the road, I noticed there was this Baptist church. And it's First Baptist of, and I'm going to leave out the town's name, but it was there. And not even 3/4 of a mile down the road, there was another nice big church building, and it says Second First Baptist Church of. So I did a little bit of asking and some research, and what happened? The church was doing well. They were reaching the community, it was healthy, and they split over what? They decided that they were going to put new carpet in the church, and the split happened because of 2 factions over the carpet color. And so now you got 2 completely different church buildings in a split church family over what? The color of the carpet. Why do we focus on those things? The ministry of the church is always ministry of people. It's not about the carpet or the picture. It's a group of people. The church is a group of people that's called to be together. If a church lives and survives, it's because the people in it are alive, they're vibrant, they're vital, they're involved. As we read about this in the 4th chapter of Philippians, you get the hint of a problem that's happening there between the two women. It says, "My beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown, stand fast in the Lord. I implore you, Euodia, and I implore Syntyche, to be of the same mind in the Lord. And I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel." Well, you notice there's exhortations, refrains. He has a deep concern for the church at Philippi. Stand fast, implore, which is beg, urge, and rejoice. Well, we can figure out pretty easily from this that there was some argument, some disagreement, some kind of spat or wrangling between the two women there. And their argument is affecting the entire church at Philippi. So, first of all, let's go to some of what a church can use as defense and what's healthy. A healthy church, has a big heart. Paul is piling on tender phrases. My beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown. That is the heart of a loving leader. A big heart. Don't you like the way he keeps repeating beloved? Maybe in my greeting with all of y'all every time, "Oh, I'm glad to see you, my beloved." Each and every one of you. Maybe that's the path we should all be going down. I love that because it means my loved ones. You're loved by God. You're loved by your fellow church members. This is Paul's way of saying to his church, I love you, church. According to Jesus Christ, the hallmark of the church should be love. There are other things that are important, truth, holiness, but what's most important is the love we show. Jesus has said, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." And we have a problem, especially in today's world, and that's that our God is not a physical presence. He's invisible. And the unbelieving world loves to point that out. "Oh, you talk to me about God. Prove God to me. Let me see." And, "Oh, that is just a way that weak people use to get through difficult life, believing in a higher power." How many of you have ever heard, I guess he might have some fame, is a guy named Jesse Ventura. He was a famous TV wrestler, had been a Navy SEAL before that, was governor of Minnesota for a year, movie star. And a quote from him, and I pity him because he is lost. "Religion is the crutch of a weak mind." I got to tell you, he's missing the boat. I pray for him. This is a guy, obvious, with some resilience and some focus. You don't make it through the Navy SEAL program without that. And yet he still doesn't have the big picture. So what love does is it takes the invisible God and it makes him visible. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 12 says, No one has ever seen God. But if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is brought to full expression in us. So you see, if the world could possibly see a community of nurturing, caring, loving, forgiving people that love people across the barriers of race, rank, and age, they might begin to listen. That's that big heart. My beloved. And he doesn't just say that. He says, my beloved and longed for brethren. Now, think about this for a minute. Paul is in prison. And he's known this church in Philippi for somewhere between 10 and 11 years, if you look at his travels. But he hadn't seen them for about 5 years. And now he's in prison. And what is he thinking about? He loves them. He longs for them. He wants to see them again. And it's not like looking for that chili that you lust for, or maybe that kind of pizza that's your favorite. He says, they are my joy. And why is that significant? You know, we call 18 times in this book, Paul uses either joy or rejoicing. And part of his joy is wrapped up in the people in his church family. So it's a healthy, a tender relationship. My beloved, my longed for brethren, my joy, and then he calls them my crown. Now, the word crown, if you look at the Greek word for it, it's Stephanos. And it's the crown of an athlete. You know, the Olympics and the wreath that they put on their head when they won an event. It's not the crown of a ruler that dictates or rules over people. It's the crown of an athlete or a contestant that actually gets a reward. So when Paul says, you're my crown, he's not saying, I'm ruling over you. He says, you're the reward I need. Knowing you in that relationship of love, that is part of my joy. That's reward enough for me, even through my suffering. That kind of feeling is definitely a component of a vigorous, healthy, strong church. But it also needs to be balanced by a firm stance. Therefore, my beloved and longed for brethren, stand fast in the Lord, beloved. And notice he uses that word beloved again, but he's telling them to take a firm stand in the context over an issue that's dividing the church because of what these two gals are arguing over. And he's saying, take a stand in healing over a division that's gotten out of hand. What does it tell you? The church isn't just a nice place to get the pat on the back, or feel good about yourself, or feel affirmed, or feel loved, although those are good things. It's also a place filled with people who have deep convictions that keep them rooted and grounded in a world that today especially is fiercely hostile to us and what we believe. Stand fast is a command. It means be in one place, immovable, be stationary, persevere. It's a military term in the Greek for a soldier that stands in battle and doesn't retreat. And it's a theme throughout the New Testament. 14 different times we're told to stand fast or be steadfast. One of my favorite stories from World War II. The Americans were beginning to get overrun by a Nazi tank push. And they're retreating. They're running. And one of the American tankers, as he's retreating, he sees a man digging a foxhole. He's like, what? You know, they're coming. The tanks are on their way. And as the tank crew sees this man digging in, they turn and they look, and the guy says, and I'm going to change one word in here, I'm not going to quote, but he says, I'm the 82nd Airborne, and this is as far as the suckers are coming. That's what we're called to do. Dig that hole in. Stand fast on God's word. Dig in that hole. Sometimes there's tendencies that make us not want to hold our ground, to retreat or hide, somehow get away from it. And we hear about that in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing your labor is not in vain. So if you want your church to be strong, you need a big heart and a firm stance. Spiritual instability leads to discouragement and disappointment and doubt. You get crushed by trials, by circumstances, overtaken with the many temptations that this world offers to us. James has said a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. We need a firm stance that says, I'm going to follow Jesus no matter what. I've talked to a counselor, and he says sometimes a question that he'll ask is, when he's talking to fellow Christians, what would it take for you to stop following Jesus? Of course, what? What do you mean? Is there an event you can think of, a catastrophic event where God crosses a line? What would it take? You know, or are you going to be like that song that we sing that says, I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. There's a story of an African pastor in Zimbabwe, and he wound up being martyred for his faith. But as they were going through his papers after he died, they read something that he wrote. And it was a philosophy of life for him. He said, my face is set, my gait is fast, my goal is heaven. My road is narrow, my way is rough, my companions are few, but my guide is reliable. My mission is clear. I cannot be bought, compromised, detoured, lured away, turned back, deluded, or delayed. I will not flinch in the face of sacrifice, hesitate in adversity, negotiate at the table of the enemy, ponder at the pool of popularity, or meander in a maze of mediocrity. I won't give up, shut up, let up, slow up, until I've preached up, prayed up, paid up, stored up, and stayed up for Christ. That's steadfastness. And it got him killed. But you know something? As I read that story and all the details in it, I think he was okay with that. In fact, I think if I could talk with him now, he'd say, yep, I made the right choice. Big heart, firm stance, and a warm embrace. And that is the ability to take two parties that are disagreeing and embrace both of them and help them resolve the conflict. We've mentioned the two women here that have something that they're not in agreement on. But he implores these two women to be of the same mind in the Lord. I urge you also, true companion, and we don't know who this is, help these women who labored with me in the gospel. So he's acknowledging they have worked at spreading the gospel. We don't really know who those women are. You know, they're not mentioned anywhere else in the New Testament. Euodia is a word that means good trip or good journey. And the word syntesh means fortunate or lucky. So Mrs. Goodtrip and Miss Lucky are having some sort of a dispute, and it's affected the entire congregation. Who knows? Maybe they brought deviled eggs to the potluck. I don't know. But something happened, and it got so advanced that it affected the entire church. And he's saying, enough of this. We need to get around this. There's all sorts of thoughts about who they were, but apparently they had been involved in the foundations of the church in the area that they were in. But think about this. The only time their names are mentioned in the Bible is over an argument that they had. And now it's been immortalized. For the next 2,000 years, people are going to read the Bible, and what are they going to say? Those are the two gals in Philippi who got them in a disagreement and caused strife in the church. I don't know about you, but I'd hate that. Is that the legacy you want to leave behind? 100 years from now, what do I want? Some sort of document to reflect as far as me. Well, the solution to their disagreement is found in the phrase, in the Lord. I implore you to be of the same mind in the Lord. That's not just a fancy phrase. It's the solution to the problem. It's always in the Lord, and that's usually what people forget. When they have an argument with each other, when they disagree, they have a different viewpoint, and you go at it, well, you've forgotten the Lord's viewpoint. So what Paul does here is really, it's brilliant. He takes a social issue and he moves it into spiritual ground. And it's become, now it's a spiritual issue. And what's he saying? Focus on God's glory. Aim at what God wants. This is all tied into the New Testament concept of unity. That doesn't mean uniformity. It means unity. It means you can still have your own opinions and ideas, but unity in the body is what we are called to have. There was a study done, the American Psychological Association, and they went and looked at a big orchestra, 80 people in it. And you've got all of these different instruments, and yet when you hear them play, it's beautiful music. It's a harmonious sound. Well, they went and they began to interview all the different instrumentalists in there and what the other members had to say. Well, the percussionists were insensitive, unintelligent, and most of them said hard of hearing. It's not real kind to the drummers, but okay. And fun-loving. The string players are arrogant, stuffy, and unathletic. The brass players, the one word describing all of them was they are loud. The woodwind players tend to be held in the highest esteem and described as quiet and meticulous, but very egotistical. So, given the descriptions that you hear just then, all these different perceptions of each other and different skills with different instruments, and what happens when they get together and play. They subordinate all their feelings and their biases to what? The leadership of the conductor. There's your solution. What should we be following? The leadership of the conductor, Jesus. So when we come to some sort of disagreement, and it's going to happen, we're all people with different, we go to the conductor and we look for the solution there. And then he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. We sang that in the chorus a week or two ago. And again, it's a command. And it's not always easy to rejoice. Sometimes it's hard to be joyful. Joy, true joy, not talking about temporary happiness, but joy is a decision much more than a sensation or a situation. It doesn't say rejoice in the Lord sometimes. It doesn't say, wait a minute. I guess I rejoice in the Lord most of the time. No. If you say that, you've still blown it. It doesn't say rejoice in the Lord on Sunday at 12:30 and only then. It says rejoice in the Lord always. Despite all of life's uncertainties, joy is a personal choice to react and respond to all those uncertainties and difficulties that each and every one of us has with a choice. Rejoice in the Lord. You know, here's Paul saying this. He's in prison. He's been beaten pretty badly. He's in stocks. Everybody know what a stock is? You know, your head and your hands. He's shackled. He's bleeding. His wrists are cut. He's bruised. And Paul and Silas one night, in the midst of all of this, what do? They began singing hymns. I don't know, maybe Paul turns to Silas and says, hey, bud, you know a song? How about this one? You start, I'm going to handle the harmony. Well, you can be sorrowful, but yet always rejoicing. And that's what he's calling you to do. Proverbs 15 and verse 15 says, he who is of a merry heart has a continual feast. And when you find people like that, well, you're attracted to them. They pull people in and around them. Get the light bulb out there. Most everybody has heard the phrase, you get more bees or flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Deliver us from grumpy Christians, right? Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. We all need to be carrying around a great big bucket of mercy. Each and every one of us carry that great big bucket. And we need to do it with some soft answers. Proverbs 15, a soft answer turns away wrath. Some of us, I know you've met people that have problems with anger or sometimes even rage. I've talked to a few of you in here and told them, you know, my mechanism of avoiding that is to have a punching bag, and when I get a little too wound up, I go beat up something that I know I won't get in trouble for. I vent. When I was a little younger, I used to do it by running. That doesn't help now. But the punching bag is still there. Why should we? The Lord's at hand. Jesus is coming back. We all And I believe he's right around the corner. I don't believe we're going to go another 2,000 years without seeing him. I don't know when, I can't say that, but the ministry of the church is ministry to people. If the church is healthy, it's because its people are healthy spiritually. One more story, and I'm going to start to wrap it up. There's a Christian named Tim. He had been a Christian for a long time, had some maturity, and he got into a group and was having conversation with other believers. And he found out, as he examined his own self, that he kept talking bad about his church. This problem, that problem. It seemed like there was always a negative role. And as he was doing that, a mental image came to him. And the image was of a bride and a groom. And it's on their wedding day. And he walks up to the groom and sort of leans in and says, "Your bride is ugly." We have to be careful about how we talk. What Jesus said is the only thing that he came to build, and that's his church. "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." So the deviled eggs at the potluck are not going to prevail against the church or anything else. It's his bride. Do you want to lean into Jesus and say, "Your bride is ugly"? I don't think so. Do you cling to that? And we all make mistakes. I can tell you, the church, I've seen people that have been hurt by the church that won't come back. I'd be telling a story if I didn't say there are times in church that I've been hurt. And as a representative of this church, if I've hurt you, I'll tell you here and now, I'm sorry. Wherever you came from, whatever has happened to you, accept an apology from a representative of Christ's big family. But you know, Jesus never said, "Follow my people." He said, "Follow me." He didn't say, "Follow my pastors. We're faulted humans." He said, "Follow me." He didn't say, "Follow my church." He said, "Follow me." Don't take it out on Jesus for having come up with some representatives that fell short. Jesus was the only perfect one and is the only perfect one. We follow a perfect Savior, but we follow him imperfectly. Each and every one of us. If you're pushing Jesus away at arm's length, if you decide, "I'm going to follow Jesus, the perfect one," let me tell you something. You are going to be surrounded by imperfection. As humans, that's the one thing we can absolutely cast in stone. We're all imperfect. We look at the people around that are following him imperfectly, and at some point, you've got to overlook them and their faults and look at the perfect one. Jesus can and will change your life if you will let him. Characteristics of a church. Focus on God and Jesus and not on the imperfections that abound around us, each and every one of us. Make the effort. I'm not saying, I know I'm going to be imperfect, so I'm not even going to try. That's a cop-out. Make the effort. But it means make the effort to in love and in health. Doesn't mean you can't counsel. Doesn't mean you can't, hey, when it's time to let somebody know, but you do it right. You know, I know there's a big difference. I mentioned a sort of a karate example before, where you run up to the guy and you yell at him, "That's wrong!" And you take the stick and you hit him. Pay attention to what you're doing. Or you come up and you say, "Man, that's great effort, but this will work even better if you make this adjustment." Two completely different results. We reach out as a church family to each other in love. And we focus on what we should be focusing on. Jesus and not each other's imperfections. Let's go to the Lord in prayer this morning. Jesus, help us focus on being your church family, Lord. And the missions that the church, your church, is called to do, to accept each other in love and kindness in our imperfections, Lord. And Lord, help us to stay focused on you and strive to hold all those mistakes and those imperfections to an absolute minimum, Lord. And most of all, Lord, help us secure our joy in you and not in what this world can bring us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.